Now, when I was first practicing for the SAT, the time between like my first ever practice SAT and my final SAT was about 2 years. And it did take me like 1.5 years to actually get good at reading. So that title is true. But I didn't actually know how to get better. I was doing passages, I was timing myself, which I advise against when I first started, and I didn't know how to actually improve. I would just do questions, and my idea was that, oh, just the more questions I do, just again and again, without reviewing, just encountering them, I'll get better gradually, just over time. And while you can get significantly better by practicing, and you can do well with the way that I did, right? I didn't practice perfectly. I was moderately lazy during my practice as well, and I wasn't consistent, but I still got the score that I wanted in the end. It just took me a longer time frame. Now, all the tips that I've learned in this, like my years of practicing for the SAT, I'm going to hopefully boil down and give to you these strategies that I implement that actually leveled up my score in reading that I got from trial and error. And hopefully that'll save you 3 to 4 months of constantly practicing and doing the work that I did if you can just learn to implement these strategies. Now, a 1600 score, they might not use these strategies, or they have versions of their own, or they have slightly different versions, but nonetheless, they have strategies for every single question, but they don't think of it like a strategy. It is so ingrained in their mind that they fully understand how to do the problem without thinking of a certain strategy. The way that they instantly start doing the problem is the strategy that they implement. Hi, I'm Karthik, and these are strategies to crack an 800 in SAT reading. All right. So my method for finding the main idea. This was my hardest question, and I would struggle finding the main idea because I would focus on a detail and think that detail was the main idea. Here's how you avoid that. Analyze a paragraph by trying to find the flow of ideas. So you're going to start with a basic idea in your topic sentence, and then there's going to be an idea in your conclusion. And you want to find how the ideas flow from one another, right? We're trying to figure out, how does the topic sentence flow to the next sentences? What changes, and then what changes for it to go to the conclusion? And we want to make like a mental remark of every single one of those points. And we know those points, and we make them like points of the paragraph. Then we combine the points of the paragraph, and that becomes our main idea for the paragraph. Now use all of those trend sentences, like the main idea points from every paragraph summarized into the full main idea of the paragraph. Use them for every single paragraph in the entire essay, and use that to find your main idea. And make sure you use those points not as like ideas that the main idea is. Like, don't just combine all of them and say that's the main idea. Use those as evidence pointing toward this general conclusion, this huge idea, and that is your main idea. Now, here's an example. Pause to read it. I'm going to move my camera either side so you can pause. So pause to read it now. And then here are some of the answer questions. So basically this passage, it flows from this idea of, the Smithsonian Museum, like the research process was in a certain way. And then like he wanted to design it, and his research strongly influenced the shape of the building. He tried to better understand it. He got fascinated with certain culture. And then in the end, that became like the shape of the museum, right? So it flows from this idea of creation, museum, culture influencing, right? And when I read all of these points, right, we want to reinforce the main point being made with a quotation, right? And what exactly does that? We want to find something that encounters all of those points, the creation of the museum and the influence of the culture, right? And, I look at A, and it just talks about the creation of the museum, and it talks about like the identity of like it basically talks about what's in it, right? And that doesn't tell us anything. That doesn't tell us anything about the main idea. Now, B, this one talks about we create a museum to figure out the form of museum, and spoke to the story from the silhouette. It references the history, it references the creation of the museum. That one's very strong. And all the other ones, right, they're just details. They're details, but they're not the whole main idea because they don't include everything that's in the flow of the entire paragraph. So the answer is B. Okay, now make sure that evidence addresses the question. And this seems so obvious, but this is a mistake that so many students make. And you have to really understand what I mean by addressing the question, right? So evidence, like when you get those 2-pair questions where you have an answer choice and then it asks, well, what is the best evidence? You want to actually figure out why the evidence not just needs to address not like the question, right? It needs to address the entire answer and the question as well. So sometimes the answer can be like, let's say the answer is a certain concept, right? And then the quotation will reference that that concept, but it won't reference that concept in relation to the question that it was asking. So the question was asking like, in a certain country, this happens, right? And the quote will just say that this happens, and you will pick the evidence as this happens, but you don't know from that quotation that the question, which is asking for the specifically about the country, that that's referenced as well. So you need to make sure that the context of the quote, right, and the quote itself shows the question, the premise of the question, and the correct answer. That's the most important part, right? So here's an example. You like pause to read this, right? But basically, the first paragraph talks about like all these different cool like ways of like transport, public transport, and how like streets are being made, and they're all like generally non-American countries. And then they talk about like in below like conveniences within these like new types of travel or like new ways of travel, because they're not necessarily new, they're just like kind of reinvented or improved. So what's the really the central idea? Public transportation are superior, right? It's superior to some travel by private, right? It's like really nice and it can be better than private, right? And it's not just European countries. It doesn't reference Americans, and it's not much international public transportation is engineered for passengers to work while on board. That's a detail. That's like more of the second part. It's not the whole thing. Now, what provides the best evidence to the question? So one, we need to find the central idea, and two, we need to find something that fits this entire like point, right? So what really does that? And if I'm looking for something that addresses the idea that public transportation is nice and that it can be better than private automobile, and it's the central idea of the whole thing, so it references all of those, the only thing that really does that is B, 35 to 37. You know, done right, public transportation can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than the private automobile. That's everything. That's the main idea. So yeah, I'd go with that one. All right. How to eliminate from two good choices. Now, keep in mind, there's always a correct answer. And that might be frustrating to hear when you have two answer choices that are really good and you don't know which one to pick, but there's always a correct answer. And let me tell you why that's important. Small details are the reason why you can't differentiate from the two good choices. There's a small detail in either in the question or the passage that tells you that this certain part is wrong, and that there aren't two good choices because you're missing a small detail. So you need to look very closely at the passage that's highlighted or at the certain points where the evidence is to why this is the correct answer. So small details are your friend. It has to be explicitly written or implied in the story. Reread the passage. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I recommend the pencil or the finger method, where you put your pencil close and you read every single word so you know exactly what's going on. You don't mess it up in your head. That's very much possible with the fatigue of taking a 4-hour long exam sitting in one area, 20 minutes of break. Use the pencil finger method even if you think you're a really good reader, right? It'll help you closely observe, and you might get some extra details of information that you hadn't beforehand. Now, don't waste too much time on these kinds of questions. Remember that your hardest questions should go last. They shouldn't go first, and you should give them the least kind of priority, because you get the same amount of points for every kind of question, right? It's like generalized. So like one question isn't going to give you more points than the other. So you need to focus on the ones that are the easiest to get the most like value out of your effort, right? And as you get better at the skill of finding the really small details that differentiate the two good answer choices, you're going to feel like this is no longer like a phenomenon of the SAT. You're no longer going to find two good answer choices. There's going to be a detail that's glaring, and you realize, oh, that makes this other one wrong, so it obviously has to be this answer. And you're just going to notice that slowly start to happen. So when you know that's happening, you know you're getting better at analysis. Now, I can't really show an example for this one. As a result of that, I can't really find a good example that has two good answer choices to me, because the small detail just seems really obvious. But it's not something that I can just show you an example of and you can immediately apply. You just need to get better at reading smaller details with the method I've described, and just knowing that you have to look for them when you have two good answer choices. Now, that's it. I hope you guys learned something today. Thank you guys so much. Peace.